Noticed people have had some positive feedback because they've been having some. I think this has been very helpful when I've offered some guided experiences. So I'd like to offer a few of those today, and we'll start out with a very fundamental one, similar to those that we've done in the past. And this is a guided experience to allow you to notice something incredibly fundamental about yourself. Okay, so most of the time we are identified, and we don't even know we're doing it, but we're identified as some part of ourselves, some fragment, some aspect of ourselves. And that part that we're identified with can shift. So we might identify with one part in one moment, and another moment we're identified with a different part. And we don't even usually notice that that's going on. We don't notice that that shift is going on. So we just think it's the same I all the time. We just think, who's doing this? I am. Who's aware? I am. But what we haven't noticed, most of us, most of the time, is that there's something far more fundamental than the I that we're identified with. And so this exploration that I'm going to guide you through is to help you to notice that which is more fundamental, that which is not shifting, that which does not come and go, that which does not change. Okay, so for this, there are no real preconditions, but as usual, I will suggest a few things that can be helpful. So so being as reasonably comfortable as possible is helpful. It's not required, but it's helpful. So if you notice that you're particularly uncomfortable and there's something that you can do to help yourself be more comfortable reasonably, then allow yourself to be more comfortable. Just don't put yourself in a position where you're likely to fall asleep. That's all. If it is comfortable for you, then I do invite you to close your eyes. And I'm going to close my eyes because it's just a little bit easier to tune in and be able to guide the experience if I have my eyes closed. And the invitation to close the eyes, I just want to be clear about why that is. It's just to reduce the amount of visual stimulation, so the amount of noise going on. And that will allow your attention to rest a little bit more internally, just a little bit less distraction. So now you can just notice that there's content happening. So what is that content? The content would be things like thought and sensation and sound and maybe smell, taste, these kinds of things. So this is content that's happening. And normally our attention is so attracted to all the content, so drawn to all the content that we're just attaching to content, identifying with content, fixated on content. And here, the invitation right now is just to notice the space in which the content is occurring. So we're not trying to get rid of content. We're not trying to silence the mind. We're not trying to get rid of sensation. We're not trying to change any of that. Instead, we're just noticing that all of that content is occurring in space. So you just notice that the sound is occurring in space. Thoughts are occurring in space. Any remaining visual sense is occurring in space because there will be inner imagery. Any taste is happening in space. Any smell is happening in space. The sound is happening in space. It's all happening in space. And you don't even have to release any identification. So there may still be a remaining identification with some subtle object. And that's okay for this exploration. We don't even need to get rid of that. We don't even need to release that. If that release happens, that's lovely. And that's definitely an exploration that's worth having at some point. And maybe we'll do that later. But for now, you don't even need to do that. So we're not even necessarily trying to change anything, just noticing that all of the content, even if there's an identification with some subtle object in space, that too is occurring in space, that all of this is occurring in space. So just have a sense of that space. Just notice that space. Notice that it's a universal space, that all of the various sensory phenomena are occurring in this same universal space. And if your mind is somehow getting in the way of this because you have a very active analytical mind that's doubting things and says, like, gee, I don't know if that's true. How do I understand that? How do I know that? Just play along. Just imagine as if you were able to sense that space. Even if you say you can't, just imagine you could. This can be very powerful. So you can just let go of the doubts and just play along as if you could imagine or sense that space. And then just do this little experiment. Find out, is there any end to space? Can you find an edge to space? Is there a limit to space? Does the space have a beginning and an end? So just explore as far as you can and see, is there any end to the space? Forward, backward, up, down, left, right, in every direction. Can you find any end to space? Any place where space begins and space ends? Okay, actually, I said that maybe we would do this exploration later, but why don't we do it now? So it will be an interesting exploration. So just notice where you are perceiving from. So there's some location from which you are perceiving. And you might say, well, it's obvious that's here, but just play along as if you could do this. So it's all just play. It's just imagination. It's just playful. So just play. Don't take it too seriously. But if you play, you'll discover some interesting things. So just notice where you are perceiving from. And then notice the qualities of like the shape. So the location, the shape, and the qualities of that point from which you are perceiving. And again, your mind, even if your mind says, that's nonsense, how could that be? Just play along, just as if. Doesn't matter even if you just make it up entirely, just play along, imagine. Again, you might discover something quite interesting by doing this. So just notice that. And then just invite the possibility that that point or that sense of self itself could soften, open, and become one with the space. So this might be, for many of you, this will be uh, a very interesting, useful exploration. You may or may not be able to grasp it with your intellectual mind, but something is revealed to you in this, something very fundamental. And I'll just suggest to you that perhaps what you can notice in this is that you actually are that space, that there are just habits of identifying as something, some content in space, but that you are at the most fundamental level, you are that space itself that has no beginning and no end. Okay, so now when and if you feel ready to transition to an open-eyed state, please do so slowly so that that's a smooth experience for you. Now, it's possible that for some of you, that will have been a very profound experience. And for some of you, it will have been a less profound experience. And for some of you, you'll say, what experience? Nothing happened. And that's fine. So there's no right answer. There's no one thing that you should experience. It's just an exploration and an invitation and a possibility of discovering something. And whatever you discover is wonderful. But what it definitely points to is that you are that space. That does not, there's no beginning and no end to it. Now, a lot of people think that having this experience of themselves as space is the thing that should solve all their problems. And that's a nice idea. And if it works for you, then that's great. In which case, I'm very happy for you. Uh, Practically speaking, for most of us, that's just the beginning. Okay. Because then we've still got all this content and these habits of identification. And this is where taking responsibility comes into play. So if you were able to just remain always in that state of awareness of yourself as that space, then would it be possible to have any problems? And the answer to that is no. So if you didn't have that experience where you can answer definitively and clearly no, then you can continue to explore that on your own. And eventually you will come to that discovery that there is this, that at the most fundamental level, you cannot have any problems. It's absolutely impossible. However, you might notice that you still have problems. Isn't that interesting? So at the fundamental level, you have no problems, but the habit of how you organize and identify within yourself continues to produce problems. Maybe this is starting to make sense.